In 2023, the United Kingdom registered 10,473 alcohol-specific deaths. That's a record, the highest number ever recorded by the Office for National Statistics in a bulletin published on the 5th of February 2025. Behind that grim figure sits a category of products that became notorious in British public health circles, so-called Tramp juice. It's a pejorative slang term used to describe very strong, very cheap lagers and ciders, the kind that deliver a lot of alcohol for very little money. We're talking about 3-litre plastic bottles of white cider at 7.5% strength, or 500ml cans of super strength lager pushing 9%. Products engineered, some would say, to maximise units per pound. This isn't just about branding or bad PR, lives are on the line here. Alcohol policy in the UK has spent the better part of 2 decades wrestling with the question: can you target the harm by targeting the product? But here's the counterpoint. The alcohol industry has consistently argued that harm isn't about specific drinks. It's about dependency. Alcohol problems aren't a product category, they say. Focus on the drinkers with the problem, not the drink itself. It's a question that's raged through parliamentary committees, court cases, and countless research papers. So the question remains: did policy experiments aimed at these cheapest, strongest drinks actually work? And if they did, what did it cost to find out? This is the story of how the UK tried to kill Tramp juice, and what happened when it did. So what exactly are we talking about when we say white cider? The category emerged in the 1980s and 90s, with brands like Diamond White appearing in 1986, followed by White Lightning in the early 1990s. These weren't your traditional cloudy, scrumpy ciders. They used light-coloured apple juice or concentrate, sometimes very little of it, fermented up to serious strength. We're talking 7.5 to 8.4% ABV, often sold in large plastic bottles. A 3-litre bottle of White Lightning, that's 7.5%, delivers 22.5 units of alcohol. That's more than the NHS weekly guideline for men, and it's in a single bottle. A report published in April 2011 by homelessness charity Thames Reach and alcohol concern laid bare the economics. These products were engineered for price. Low juice content meant lower production costs. High alcohol content meant more bang per buck for the customer. The result? You could buy oblivion for pocket change. But here's the industry counterpoint. Producers like Aston Manor cited that same 2011 report and argued that white cider wasn't uniquely cheap or harmful, and the problem, they said, wasn't the product, but the people drinking it. Focus on dependency, not drinks. It's a neat argument, but it sidesteps the question. If you make a product that delivers maximum alcohol for minimum cost, who do you think is going to buy it? To understand how these drinks got so cheap, you have to follow the money, and in the UK that means following the duty system. For decades, cider enjoyed a sweetheart deal on alcohol duty compared to beer and spirits. The rates were lower, the definitions were looser. You could produce something that was barely recognisable as cider, minimal juice, maximum alcohol, and still qualify for the preferential rate. This became untenable, and so on the 1st of September 2010, the Alcoholic Liquor Duties, definition of cider, Order 2010 came into effect. It set a minimum requirement, 35% apple or pear juice content with a specific gravity of at least 1033. If your product didn't meet that threshold, it couldn't be taxed as cider anymore. The government's explanatory memo was clear. This was about stopping products with little or no juice content from exploiting cider's lower duty band. It was a technocratic fix to a pricing loophole. But here's the thing. Even after tightening the rules, cider still enjoyed distinctive duty treatment, and it remained cheaper to produce strong cider than strong beer, pound for pound or unit for unit. The 2010 order closed one gap, but it didn't level the playing field entirely. And that matters because the fiscal structure of alcohol duty doesn't just reflect categories, it creates incentives. If you're a producer looking to maximise profit on a high-strength, low-cost product, cider was still your best bet. The pennies per unit calculation that made Tramp juice viable was written into the tax code. If white cider had a poster child, it was White Lightning. The brand became synonymous with the category and with everything people hated about it. By the late 2000s, White Lightning was a market leader, and it was also a reputational albatross. In May 2009, Heineken cut the brand's strength from 7.5% to 5.5% ABV, a move widely interpreted as damage control. But it wasn't enough. So on the 15th of December 2009, Heineken announced it would withdraw White Lightning entirely. The company cited concerns about the brand's image and a desire to act responsibly. David Ford, marketing director at Heineken UK, told Marketing Week the decision was about driving value back into the cider category. Trade publication Drinks reported that the brand would be delisted by the 31st of March 2010. It was a dramatic exit, a major brewer walking away from a profitable product because the reputational cost had become too high. White Lightning had become toxic, not just to consumers, but to the company selling it. But let's be clear, Heineken's stated motives were carefully couched. They were talking about value and responsibility, but they were also a business making a commercial calculation. The brand had become a lightning rod for criticism, and the heat wasn't worth the revenue. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Killing White Lightning didn't kill the market, it just left a vacuum. Other brands, other supers, other white ciders were waiting in the wings to fill the gap. The problem wasn't one product, it was the underlying economics that made products like White Lightning viable in the first place. Heineken could withdraw, but the incentive structure couldn't. White Lightning's exit didn't mean the end of cheap, strong alcohol. The market simply recalibrated. Supers stepped into the breach, super strength lagers like Carlsberg Special Brew pushing 9% ABV, and other white cider brands remained on shelves. The underlying economics hadn't changed, and neither had the demand. But the category was now under scrutiny. In December 2014, the Portman Group, the alcohol industry's self-regulatory body, upheld a complaint against Carlsberg Special Brew. The issue? That a 500ml can at 9% ABV contains approximately 4.5 units of alcohol in a single, unresealable container. The panel ruled that this format encouraged immoderate consumption, breaching the industry's own code. The decision, published on the 11th of December 2014, asked retailers to stop ordering that specific pack format after the 31st of March 2015. It wasn't a ban, just regulatory pressure applied through voluntary compliance. Carlsberg argued that pack size doesn't determine how people drink, but the panel disagreed. They pointed to evidence that larger, unresealable single-serve formats do influence consumption patterns, particularly for high-strength products. This was a new front in the battle, not just the product itself, but now the packaging. The format became the vector. A 500ml can delivers more units than a 330ml one, and if you can't reseal it, you're incentivized to finish it. It was, though, a tacit admission. You can't just pull one brand and expect the problem to disappear. You have to target the structure, the strength, the price, the format. That makes these products what they are. While regulators debated packaging formats, homelessness charities were dealing with the human cost. Thames Reach, a charity working with rough sleepers in London, made a stark claim in the early 2010s that super-strength ciders and lagers were killing more of their clients than heroin or crack cocaine. The statement appeared in Druglink magazine in May/June 2011 and was amplified across media outlets. It was a deliberately provocative comparison designed to cut through, and it worked. The claim became a rallying cry for campaigners pushing for action on cheap, strong alcohol. If these drinks were more lethal than Class A drugs, how could the government justify leaving them on sale for pennies? But we need to be precise here. Thames Reach's statement was based on their frontline experience with rough sleepers, a very specific, highly vulnerable population. It was not drawn from national mortality statistics. It was charity-level evidence, advocacy framed to make a point. That doesn't mean it was wrong. Alcohol is implicated in thousands of deaths each year, and cheap, strong products are disproportionately consumed by people with dependency. But the claim wasn't a peer-reviewed epidemiological finding. It was a frontline workers' assessment filtered through the lens of crisis intervention. Still, it catalysed action. Local councils, health bodies, and eventually national policymakers began asking, if these products are this harmful, what can we do about them? The answer would come in waves, starting local, then going national. Before any government-imposed price floors or duty hikes, a town in Suffolk tried something simpler, asking shops to stop stocking the strongest, cheapest drinks. In September 2012, Ipswich launched Reducing the Strength, a voluntary scheme asking off-licences to stop selling beers and ciders above 6.5% ABV. The threshold was carefully chosen. It caught the super strength products like Special Brew and white ciders, but left most mainstream drinks untouched. ITV Anglia reported on the 25th of September 2012 that the scheme was gaining traction. It wasn't a ban, no laws were passed. It was a voluntary agreement between police, councils and retailers, but it worked, at least in Ipswich. The model spread. Other towns and cities adopted similar schemes. The Local Government Association published guidance in 2015-16 to help councils replicate it. By 2016, evaluations were appearing in journals like BMJ Open and BMC Public Health using mixed methods to assess impact. And the findings? Reduced availability did correlate with fewer alcohol-related incidents in some areas. But the schemes were patchy. Some retailers signed up, others didn't. Some areas saw results, others saw displacement. People just bought the drinks elsewhere. And there was a legal wrinkle. Voluntary schemes that encourage retailers to collectively restrict certain products can raise competition law concerns. The Association of Convenience Stores and the LGA both noted this tension in guidance documents. You're asking businesses to coordinate on what they sell, which starts to look like a cartel if you squint. But the experiments did prove something important. Targeted removals of the cheapest, strongest products could reduce harm without a blanket ban. The question was whether you could do it at scale with the force of law behind it. That question would soon move to the courts. Voluntary schemes were one thing, a legal price floor was another. Scotland passed legislation for minimum unit pricing in 2012, but it would take 6 years to actually implement it. Why? Because the Scotch Whisky Association and other industry groups challenged it in court, arguing it breached EU trade law. The case wound its way through the Scottish courts, then up to the European Court of Justice. And on the 23rd of September 2015, the ECJ handed down a preliminary ruling that raised serious questions about proportionality. Could Scotland justify a price floor when a tax increase might achieve the same goals with less restriction on trade? The answer ultimately was yes. The UK Supreme Court ruled on the 15th of November 2017 that minimum unit pricing was a proportionate response to Scotland's specific public health crisis. The court found that MUP targeted the cheapest, strongest drinks more precisely than taxation could. A tax raises all prices, a price floor only lifts the bottom. And so, on the 1st of May 2018, Scotland finally implemented MUP at 50 pence per unit. Here's how it works. A 3-litre bottle of 7.5% white cider contains 22.5 units. Under MUP, it can't be sold for less than £11.25. A 500ml can of 9% super strength lager contains 4.5 units. Minimum price, £2.25. Overnight, the economic logic that made Tramp juice viable shifted. The drinks didn't disappear, but they stopped being pocket change purchases. The question now was, would it actually work? Predictably, Scotland became a natural experiment. Researchers tracked sales, hospital admissions and deaths before and after MUP came into force. The early findings, published in the BMJ in 2019 and 2022, showed reduced retail alcohol sales, around 3 to 5% overall, with the sharpest drops in cheap, high-strength products. People were buying less of the stuff that MUP specifically targeted. But the real test was health outcomes. In March 2023, Public Health Scotland and researchers published a major evaluation in The Lancet. They found that in the first 2.5 years of MUP, alcohol-attributable deaths fell by an estimated 13.4% and hospital admissions dropped by around 4.1%. Those are associated reductions, not pure causality, but there are always confounding factors. But the scale and timing of the drops aligned with MUP's introduction. The World Health Organization's Europe office took notice, publishing a briefing in July 2023 that called Scotland's policy a model worth replicating. But here's the counterpoint. The benefits weren't evenly distributed. The mortality reductions were largest in the most deprived communities, the places where cheap, strong alcohol had done the most damage. But there was limited evidence that people with severe dependency reduced their total consumption by much. Some switched to different products, Others kept drinking the same amount but paid more for it. This prompted calls to pair MUP with better access to treatment services. A price floor can reduce population level harm, but it's not a silver bullet for addiction. You can make the cheapest drinks more expensive, but you can't price people into sobriety. Still, the data was clear enough. MUP worked, at least in terms of reducing alcohol-related deaths and hospital admissions at scale. The debate had moved from theory to evidence. Scotland's results didn't stay contained within Scotland's borders. Wales introduced its own 50p MUP on the 2nd of March 2020, right as the COVID-19 pandemic began to reshape everything. The timing was unfortunate. Trying to isolate the effects of MUP from the effects of lockdowns, economic disruption, and widespread anxiety became a methodological nightmare. Still, Wales pushed ahead. On the 10th of July 2025, the Welsh Government published its 5-year operation and effect report. The findings were broadly positive, showing similar patterns to Scotland, reduced sales of cheap, strong alcohol, and some evidence of health benefits. But the report was careful to acknowledge the complexity. Pandemic-era data is messy, and attributing specific outcomes to MUP alone is much harder than it looks. Northern Ireland consulted on MUP between February and June 2022, but hasn't implemented it yet. The consultation gathered evidence and opinions, but political inertia and devolved governance complications have slowed progress. England, meanwhile, has remained a holdout. The Westminster government has repeatedly reviewed the evidence from Scotland and Wales, but hasn't adopted MUP. The reasons are part political, part ideological, concerns about nanny state overreach, industry lobbying, and a preference for voluntary measures over statutory intervention. The result is a kind of patchwork. 3 of the UK's 4 nations have taken one approach, the largest has taken another. That creates its own complications with cross-border purchasing, differential pricing, and questions about equity. If MUP works, why should some UK residents benefit while others don't? The policy map of Britain now reflects not just devolution, but divergence on how to handle the cheapest, strongest drinks. For all that's said though, MUP wasn't the only lever that Westminster could pull. Duty bans offered another way to nudge prices upwards. In the autumn budget of 2017, which was announced on the 22nd of November, the Treasury created a new, higher duty band specifically for ciders between 6.9 and 7.5% ABV. This was a surgical strike aimed squarely at white ciders, the products sitting just below the 7.5% threshold that had become the category's sweet spot. The new band came into effect on the 1st of February 2019. It was a tacit admission. You can't rely on products to self-regulate their way out of a public health crisis. You have to change the tax structure that makes these products profitable. Then came the 2023 duty reform, which shifted the entire UK alcohol duty system to an ABV-based model. The idea was to create a more rational system where higher strength drinks paid proportionally higher duty, regardless of category. But even under the new framework, cider retains some distinctive treatment. HMRC's technical guidance for 24 to 25 still recognises category-specific rules. And the upshot is that duty tweaks did raise prices for the strongest ciders, but they didn't eliminate the differential entirely. Without MUP, cheap, strong ciders could still undercut beer and spirits on a per-unit basis in England. Campaigners from organisations like the Institute of Alcohol Studies have argued that duty alone isn't enough. You actually need the price floor to truly close the gap. Tax nudges do matter, of course. They alter the price ladders that make Tramp juice economically viable, but they're not a silver bullet. The incentive structure persists unless you address it directly. Now, it's easy to cast producers and retailers as villains in this story, but if we're going to be fair, we need to hear their side. The industry's core argument has been consistent. Alcohol harm is driven by dependency, not by specific products. Aston Manor and other white cider producers, quoted in the 2011 Thames Reach report, pointed out that white cider was a tiny fraction of total alcohol sales. The problem, they said, wasn't the drink, it was the drinker. The Portman Group's self-regulatory code, which led the 2014 ruling on Carlsberg Special Brew, was held up as proof that voluntary action could work. Producers and retailers argued that targeted measures, changing pack sizes, enforcing marketing codes, supporting problem drinkers, were preferable to blunt price controls that penalise responsible consumers. And it's a pretty coherent position, right? Why punish moderate drinkers with higher prices when the issue is a small minority with dependency problems? But here's the counterpoint. Public health evaluations found that MUP did reduce sales and harms at a population level. The policy worked, even if it wasn't perfect, but it also created a wrinkle. Some retailers captured windfall revenues when prices went up. They pocketed the difference rather than passing it to government as tax revenue. Alcohol Focus Scotland estimated these windfalls in the tens to hundreds of millions of pounds per year, depending on assumptions. In October 2024, they published a paper calling for an alcohol harm prevention levy to recapture some of that revenue and fund treatment services. The tension here is real. Paternalism versus personal responsibility. Population health versus individual liberty. The industry's position isn't a straw man, it's a legitimate policy debate. But the evidence suggests that when it comes to the cheapest, strongest drinks, targeted intervention works better than hoping for voluntary restraint. No policy operates in a vacuum, of course. Critics of MUP raised predictable concerns. Wouldn't people just drive to England to buy cheaper booze? Wouldn't dependent drinkers switch to spirits or illicit alcohol? Wouldn't low-income, moderate drinkers be unfairly penalised? The evidence, as it comes in, is more nuanced than either camp expected. On cross-border purchasing, Public Health Scotland published a study in 2024 examining whether Scots were buying alcohol in England to dodge MUP, and the finding was that no clear evidence of substantial cross-border purchasing at levels that would offset MUP's population-level effects. Individual stores exist, people do make trips, but the data doesn't show a mass exodus. On substitution, there was limited evidence that people with severe dependency reduced their total alcohol intake. Some switched to different products within the MUP framework, others kept drinking the same amount but just paid more for it, which raises uncomfortable questions about impoverishing already vulnerable people. This is where the pair MUP with treatment argument gains force. A price floor can reduce availability and population harm, but doesn't address the root causes of dependency. BMJ commentary in 2023 emphasised this point. Structural interventions need to be matched with accessible, well-funded treatment services. Critics still cite substitution effects and poverty impacts as reasons to oppose MUP, but the broader synthesis from Public Health Scotland and The Lancet suggests that population-level health gains outweigh these concerns, at least in aggregate. The policy isn't perfect, no policy is, but the evidence today indicates it achieved what it set out to do. The question isn't whether MUP has trade-offs, it does. The question is whether those trade-offs are acceptable given the alternative, a market that delivers maximum alcohol for minimum cost with the predictable harm that follows. So, did Scotland kill Tramp juice? Not quite, but it did make it a lot more expensive. On the 30th of September 2024, Scotland increased minimum unit pricing from 50p to 65p per unit. Public Health Scotland, Alcohol Focus Scotland, and the Scottish Government all framed the uprating as necessary to maintain effectiveness. Inflation had eroded the real terms impact of 50p floor over the 6 years that had passed. So, if you wanted MUP to keep doing what it was designed to do, make the cheapest, strongest drinks less cheap, you had to raise the floor. The Guardian covered the move in February 2024 ahead of the official implementation, noting renewed debate about retailer profits. If shops were capturing windfall revenues under 50p MUP, then they capture even more under 65p, hence the calls for a levy. Let's do the maths again. That 3-litre bottle of 7.5% white cider is 22.5 units. Now, that can't be sold for less than £14.63. That 500ml can of 9% super strength lager, minimum £2.93. These aren't pocket change purchases anymore, they're deliberate decisions. The classic Tramp juice tier, the products that sparked this entire policy saga, now faces a sustained price floor across most of the UK. Wales is at 50p, Scotland is at 65p, England remains the outlier, but even there duty tweaks have nudged prices upwards. But here's the counterpoint. The debate still hasn't ended. Critics still raise concerns about costs to low-income moderate drinkers versus benefits to highest-risk groups. Wales's 5-year review, published in July 2025, acknowledges these trade-offs while broadly endorsing the policy. So, what have we learned? That you can't fix alcohol harm with one lever. You need price floors, duty brands, voluntary schemes, treatment services, and enforcement, all pulling in the same direction. MUP worked, but it worked because it was part of a broader shift in how the UK thought about cheap, strong alcohol. The term Tramp juice is pejorative, a slang shorthand for a category of products that became emblematic of a deeper problem. The real story isn't about vilifying drinks or people, it's about policy instruments that target harm without banning choice entirely. Scotland's 65p floor is the latest chapter, not the final word. Outcomes are still being measured, projected, estimated. We won't have definitive 5-year data for 65p MUP until 2029, but the direction is clear. The era of maximum alcohol for minimum cost is over, at least in parts of the UK. Whether that's killed Tramp juice or just changed its price tag depends on how you define the problem. The products still exist, but the economics that made them what they were, a vector for cheap oblivion, have shifted. And for the people whose lives were most at risk from those products, that shift has been measurable. Not perfect, not universal, but measurable. And that's as close to a win as public health policy ever gets.